Every animal on Earth is constrained by its energy budget. In an article for Smithsonian Magazine, Jerry Adler proposes that for human beings, most calories are burned invisibly through activities like powering the heart, the digestive system, and especially the brain, which silently works to move molecules around within and among its 100 billion cells. A human body at rest devotes roughly 1/5 of its energy to the brain, regardless of whether it's thinking anything useful or really thinking anything at all. Now, in 2009, Harvard University professor of biological anthropology, Richard Wrangham, proposed this, the cooking hypothesis, which is the theory that our brains became significantly larger than our ancestors because of cooking. They could spend less time on energy-draining activities like foraging, chewing, digesting foods because cooking drew out additional nutrients from their food, and they had more energy to spend. Larger brains allowed us to process more information, create more dynamic social groups, and adjust to unfamiliar habits. Now, what is the thing that made all of this possible? Well, legend has it that Prometheus, the son of a Titan, scaled Mount Olympus, the home of the gods, to steal fire from the workshop of the god of fire and metalworking Hephaestus and the goddess of war Athena. Now, Prometheus gave that fire to humans, which gave them the power to harness nature for their own benefit and ultimately dominate the natural order. With that fire, humans could care for themselves with food and with warmth, and they could also forge weapons and wage war. Prometheus' gift of fire acted as a catalyst for the rapid progression of civilization. When a community gets new and powerful tools, the way that we live our lives changes drastically and changes for the better. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you too. I'm Dan Mall, and as Phil said, I run a design collaborative called SuperFriendly that specializes in partnering with in-house teams to make better products through design systems. And I want to talk to you today about some of the most common design system pitfalls that we've seen in our work, and also how to avoid them. Let's get started. A few months ago, I asked on Twitter, if someone said to you, show me your design system, what would be the first thing that you'd pull up? Now, 50% of respondents replied with, my pants. Thank you, Twitter. But after that, here are all the different kinds of things with which people replied. It's going to be a long list. Now, what does this list signal? What does all of the stuff here mean? Does this say that despite all of the great articles and talks and books and conferences that we have about design systems, that we're still unsure about what they actually are? I love the definition that Alla Kalmatova suggests in her book, Design Systems, which is published by Smashing Magazine. She says, a design system is a set of connected patterns and shared practices, coherently organized to serve the purposes of a digital product. I think that's perfect. Now, unfortunately, not everyone follows this guidance. When a lot of people think about design systems, they picture something like this, right? Something in Figma or Sketch, something that displays all of the individual pieces. Now, this is a UI kit. UI kits are really, really useful, but they're only a piece of a design system, not really the entire thing. If we go back to Alla's definition, a set of connected patterns and shared practices coherently organized to serve the purposes of a digital product, really, a UI kit is just this part, the connected patterns. So let's talk about all of the other pieces here. We already mentioned a UI kit. Now, the other obvious part of this is of the connected patterns that Alla talked about is a library of all of the components, which is typically the code counterpart to what would normally be in a UI kit. Every good system has guidelines. Good design system has guidelines. I think we all probably know that. And that kind of takes care of the shared practices part, right? So we have our connected patterns in our UI kit and in our component library. We have shared practices in the form of guidelines. And then rather than those guidelines just kind of floating around or not having a home, we typically collect all of those things, all those guidelines and the components from the library into a reference site. And some people call it a style guide site. And so that takes care of the coherently organized part, right? We have them in a place that is organized that we can kind of browse. And then all of that stuff comes together to help you make a thing, to help you make a product. And that covers the last part, right? To serve the purposes of a digital product. So now that we have all of our pieces, this is really what our design system is made of and how each of the pieces relate to each other. In our product on the right, the digital part is important, right? Because that's the part that specifies that our design system needs to be a piece of software in order to create a digital product. You couldn't create a digital product otherwise. And of course, the more digital products you have, like websites and apps and kiosks and things like that, the more helpful your design system eventually becomes. Okay, one last piece to take it to the next level. All of this is part of that definition that Alla shared, is table stakes for a design system. But if you keep your eye on the top right of the box on the left there, a lot of teams are now playing around with this idea of design tokens, which you can document in a reference site, as well as import directly into a component library to make your design system even more modular and even more reusable. So here are all the things that are involved in a design system. Now, I probably didn't really tell you anything that you didn't know. Probably nothing here is that novel, even if this visualization is new to you. And yet so many teams still struggle with design systems, right? Why is that? Aren't the pieces here pretty straightforward? Well, at SuperFriendly, we have a service that we've been testing out with a couple of clients over the last couple of months called the Design System Diagnostic. And like you see in the screenshot here, what we do is we look under the hood of that client's design system, and we audit it under 8 different categories. And here are the categories that we audit: organizational involvement, assets and tooling, team workflow, design language, code architecture, product implementation, campaigning, and maintenance and governance. Now, I know it's a bit to process all at once, but it might be fun if you just take a guess to yourself, or you can even write it in the chat just to see if you'd be right, to see which one of these is the one that we see teams struggle with most. Which one of these floats to the top of the list as the most problematic, or the one that the teams have the most questions about? If you want to write it in the chat, that's totally fine. If you want to think it to yourself, totally cool too. Okay, so what we do is we catalog all the results from the diagnostic, as well as the questions that we get in our workshops, in our projects, and we sort them into all of these categories. So let me reorder these categories to show you where we get the most and the least amount of questions. This is how it generally shakes out. We get the most amount of questions, around 20% in team workflow, and then it cascades down from there. So what can we tell just from this view here? Well, let's look at the bottom of this list. Only 1% of the questions and comments that we get are about assets and tooling. In general, what we find is that designers and developers know how to design and develop. Who would have thought? Very rarely do we see teams that are confused about the what. Right? What a design system is, what it's good for, things like that. Instead, all the stuff that they ask about and they're less scratching their heads about is the how, right? How to work together better, how to integrate a design system seamlessly into products, all of that kind of stuff. And so for the rest of this talk, I want to focus on 2 or 3 specific pitfalls that I see design systems fall subject to often. How to use a design system effectively, how to use a design system properly with teams and with other people, and then also how to get other teams to use it. Let's start with that last one, actually. How do you get people to use your design system? And actually, even before that, how do you get anyone to even want to use your design system? There's no shortage of search results when you Google how to get buy-in for a design system. And most of the top results are similar sage advice, and we have done many of the same things before. Essentially, you collect your case, you prepare your return on investment talking points and slides, you march into your leadership's office, and you exclaim, "Let me tell you why this company needs a design system." Sometimes this works. Most times it doesn't. Let me tell you about a better way. During the Korean War, there was a significant number of defectors from a particular US training camp. So Dr. Frank Wesley, who is a professor of psychology at Portland State University, he set out to discover what made this particular camp so unique. And what he learned was this camp specifically taught the soldiers that North Koreans were cruel, were heartless, they were barbarians, and they despised the United States and they sought its destruction. Now, when some of the people from this camp were captured, however, they found something else. What they found was unexpected kindness from their captors. They were shown unexpected kindness from their captors. And this was enough to change their minds, this unexpected kindness. Rather than walking into your design director or your VP of products office with your ROI facts, instead, try walking in with unexpected kindness. And most of the time, what it looks like these kinds of words coming out of your mouth. You see, your leadership has their own battle to fight. Now, certainly, it is not nearly as significant as a literal international war, but they are trying to conquer expectations of their roadmap from their stakeholders. And so these are the kinds of things that your leadership is focused on. They're focused on things like rebranding, replatforming, content migration, data migration, mergers and acquisitions, things like that. Now, these are the best kinds of opportunities for design system efforts because the organization has already committed to a large company-wide change. Hitch your buy-in quest to that wagon because it's already on the move. Volunteer your team to tackle any of these things. And you don't even have to say the word design system. In fact, we often encourage a lot of our clients not to say those words to leadership because it's just a distraction. And so if you want a suggestion on what to replace the phrase design system with, you can replace it with phrases like 3 months ahead of schedule, or less bugs, or higher velocity. Right? These are kind gifts. This is the unexpected kindness that you can give to your product leader. And it will be unexpected because typically when people talk to their managers or their leaders, it's because they want something, not necessarily because they're trying to give something to that person. People like us, all of you watching and me, we know that the way that we'll accomplish these things, 3 months ahead of schedule, less bugs, higher velocity, the way that we'll accomplish those things is through a thing called a design system. But that's really inside baseball. You don't have to share that with everyone. Okay, so let's say you got your buy-in from leadership to help out with the replatforming or the rebrand or any of that stuff. What's next? This is probably the single biggest pitfall that I see teams walk into blindly. What do teams usually do at this point? They start making components. No, that is a terrible idea. Why is this so bad? Because you just promised your head of product that you would help them with the roadmap. So help them with the roadmap. Now, how would you normally do that? If you weren't doing a design system, you would go and check out a backlog and you'd pick off whatever's ready and start working on that thing. And that is still a great thing to do here. So many teams try to do something that's more design system-y because they feel like, well, we're doing design system stuff, so we got to do something design system-y. And instead, you don't want to do that. Just do your regular old product stuff. The best way to grow your design system is to continue to focus on creating customer value. Most good organizations structure their backlog to maximize and accelerate customer value. So picking off roadmap items is you helping your company improve your product, which helps your design system too. It's win-win all around. Now, one of the basic reasons that teams don't do this in general is because it's hard. It's difficult to know what to do sometimes. Right? If you're feeling that on your backlog or on your roadmap, you're definitely not alone in that. Whether you're a product leader or you're working on a team with a leader, that's certainly not an exclusive problem. I see a lot of teams have that. We have a podcast about design systems called Get It Out of Your System. And we talk to design system leaders about what's most difficult for them in wrangling their design systems. And so here's what a few of them had to say. We talked to Joanna Kirtley over at Liberty Mutual. She's a design system lead there. Joanna, what's the most difficult thing for you and for your team lately?
The most difficult thing right now is that we have so much to do and not enough time or resources.
Yeah, okay. So how do you stay organized with your team and make sure that you're continually delivering customer value?
We have a backlog. It's a very extensive backlog. And we basically just have some really ambitious goals for Q1 of all the components we want to either add to the system or revise in the system. And we're working through that list as fast as we can.
That makes sense. I bet a bunch of the teams are in the same boat. Kim Williams over at Mintage, she's the head of product design there. She had a kind of a pretty similar sentiment. Kim, what's tough for you lately regarding design systems?
The toughest part is being new and also shifting gears from having a lot of resources and a lot of team members to having a small and mighty team and trying to figure out how I'm going to balance everything to get this work done.
Yeah, again, they're a resource problem. Thanks, Kim. This story seems pretty familiar also for Lindsay Barry over at Lyft. Lindsay, do you find it at all difficult to kind of stay aligned with your roadmap and with your team?
We work so closely with our users, the designers and engineers at Lyft, that we end up in a place where we're getting feedback quite often, right? And that feedback can come from various places. But when we respond to that feedback, however long or short we end up responding, it can feel very reactionary versus the intentionality that we may have when we start planning a roadmap and we have all these ideas around like exactly what we want to finish in a quarter or a half. And all these input and feedback from the people sitting right next to us are seemingly like throwing us off that original roadmap or intention-based designing or building.
That makes total sense. So there you have it. 3 quick examples of how difficult it is for even really experienced design system leaders and their teams to balance the needs of design systems and the products they serve and how they're actually trying to deal with that. And so how do you choose? What are some good techniques for being able to balance those things? A couple years ago, we helped create a design system for a small Catholic liberal arts university just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the US called Seton Hill University. And the way that we did that design system work was by doing just the regular old product work. right? What you see here in front of you is the health sciences page, which was an example of our area of study template. And if we scroll down this page, you'll see a purple area here that says from degrees to careers. And the idea was that for every area of study, we could show the kinds of jobs that students get who have this degree, and then what job they would typically get after they graduate. So we designed it, we built it, we didn't do any design system-y stuff. We looked at this component here and we said, well, what component is this? Seems like this is the from degrees to careers component. We figured it would be kind of a one-off. It would be a snowflake, as we sometimes call it, not terribly reusable, pretty straightforward, called it a day, right? Okay, then we moved on, started making a few more pages. This one here is the campus life page, the campus life template. And we figured that it would be a good idea and nice to include, say, a calendar event on the campus life page. And as we talked about it with the team, we realized that we could use maybe a pretty similar format that we used from degrees to careers. So farther down on this page, we mocked that up and it looks like this, looks pretty good. From an implementation standpoint though, it felt a little bit odd to use the from degrees to careers component for upcoming events. So we had a couple of choices here. One is to realize that the from degrees to careers components was a little bit too specific, and we would duplicate it and actually modify it to make an upcoming events component. So we'd have two of those. The second option that we had was we could maybe abstract the from degrees to careers components so that it serves both of these cases. And so we chose the second path here. We abstracted it into a component that we called the vertical tabs component. And then the vertical tabs component can accept anything in the main body. And then the tabs themselves can accept a modifier of rainbow with colors to be passed in. Otherwise, it would have the default of this kind of red and gray. Now, when I show this simple example to teams generally, there's usually two pieces of feedback that I get. The first is this: didn't you do it backwards, right? Couldn't you have started by saying, well, let's just make a vertical tabs component and then we'll use it on each of these pages? And the answer is yes, we totally could have done it that way. The problem is we didn't know that we needed this component until we got to designing the page. You see, it's significantly easier to fill your design system with components you actually need when, and the components that you'll actually use when you have real content and real use cases. Designing abstractly is significantly more difficult. For almost every organization that we work with, they have what I call a design system graveyard, which is full of attempts of design systems that no one ever uses. And it's because it's full of components that weren't really needed. And it also didn't have the components that everybody wanted and was asking for. So there are generally two ways to make design systems. And here's how Normies make design systems. The first thing they do is they sort of guess what abstract components are needed. Like, oh, we'll probably need some buttons and some tables and some headers and things like that. And then they sort of like send out some thoughts and prayers and cross their fingers and hope for good luck that people will actually use it. That's not a great way to make a design system. But here is how good-looking geniuses like all of us make design systems. The first thing that we do is we make great products that customers love. That's the job. And then secondly, then we extract components from those products to place them in the design system. And there's actually a particular method to this madness here. You can't just choose any product to be able to do this with. You have to assess which products best feed your design system and in what order. I call these pilots. And if I could teach only one thing about design systems for the rest of my design system career, it would be pilots. In my opinion, using pilots are the easiest, fastest, most successful way to create a design system. So here's how it works. Let's say we were making a design system for Nike. What we would do is we would look across our roadmap for the next, say, year or two, and we would make a chart where we listed all of the sites and apps and digital products that appear on our roadmap over that time frame. I'm just going to use 3 to keep this example really simple, but realistically, this list will end up being around 10 or 20 or so. So let's say for Nike, our roadmap is a redesign of Nike.com, a version 2 of the Sneakers iOS app, and then a brand new employee intranet. The next thing we do is we need a set of criteria that we're going to use to evaluate all of the products through. And at SuperFriendly, we have 8 specific criteria that we tend to use. You could find it at this article here in more detail, but I'll go through those 8 criteria here. One of the first things we look for is what is the potential for common components in this app or site or kiosk or digital product? Does this pilot have many components that can be reused in other products? If so, it'll score really highly on this criteria. If not, it'll score low. The second criteria that we have is pretty similar, which is the potential for common patterns, right? So does this pilot have many patterns that can be used in other products? Now, this is a little bit of a nuance here and kind of semantic, but we try to distinguish between components and patterns. The way that we define that is a component is something that you would probably be familiar with, like a card or a table or a header or a footer, something that's kind of elemental in markup. A pattern we define as more like a flow. So login is a pattern, checkout is a pattern. It really doesn't matter which one you call component or pattern, just that you're distinguishing between the two, and that's the way that we do it. The third thing that we look for is we look for high value elements. So is there a component or a pattern with high business value that's the heart of this project? We were working with a client once that had this one table that was like the magical table. There was a lot of functionality in that table, and it was just a table, and it wasn't reused a lot. But if we could get that component right, the one or two places they needed to use it would create a tremendous amount of value for them and for users. So we look for things like that. There might be things that maybe don't get reused a lot, but if you have them, they create a lot of value. The next thing is technical feasibility. So how simple is a technical implementation of this design system? Is a large refactor required? So if this is something where we're going to have to refactor a lot of things in order to build this product, it's probably going to take a lot of time. And so it might not be a good pilot. It might score low on our pilot criteria. The next thing that we look for is an available champion. So if we make this pilot, whether it's the intranet or the app, is someone going to be working on this that can see this all the way through and also celebrate it and evangelize it using the design system and even contributing back to it? So what are the things in this particular pilot that people are going to sing about and actually acts as a good marketing piece for other teams to want to use the design system? Because they'll say like, oh, you built Nike.com with the design system? That looks awesome. Can we use it too? Related to kind of 2 points ago is we look at scope. Is this work accomplishable in our pilot time frame of, we generally look at 3 to 4 weeks, but that'll vary from organization to organization, kind of insert your timing there. And so if this is a product that you're going to make that's going to take 2 years to make, you don't want your design system to be held up for 2 years because you can't harvest components back into it until you finish this. So look for a reasonable scope within your roadmap. The next thing is technical independence, which is how decoupled is this work from legacy design and code, and are there clear start and end points? So related to technical feasibility, but can we make this as a standalone thing that will then inform our design system? And the last thing is marketing potential. Will this work excite others to use the design system? If we build an intranet on the design system, that might be a big effort, but if people look at the intranet and go like, whatever, it's boring anyway, that might not be a great marketing piece for the design system itself. So these are the criteria that we use to evaluate. And what we do is we take that criteria and we lay it into our chart of digital products. And then what we can do is we can actually create a score for each of our products based on this criteria. Now, there are two specific things that I think are really great about doing it this way. The first thing is that it just makes figuring out the sequence of these things, how you should tackle your roadmap items, and makes it super easy. Just follow the scores. Do the highest score first, and then the lowest score last. Right? And if you've scored this accurately and you do the highest scoring pilot first, then the second one you do should benefit from all the work that you've done in the first one. And then the third one that you do should benefit from the work that you did in the second one, and so on. The pilots should all get easier as you go along, because what you should be doing is after every pilot, or sometimes even during your, while you're designing and building, you're extracting components and patterns back into the design system. You're growing the design system constantly. One quick note that I want to make here is that a pilot doesn't have to be a full app or a full site. We recently did some work with a major airline, and many of our pilots, and sorry for the unintended pun there, were portions of pages, just parts of pages like a flight search results table or arrival and departure flight block, because of how complex and how much business logic was wrapped up in each of those examples. In the Seton Hill example that I showed earlier, each of those pages could be considered a pilot, not the whole site as one pilot, because we could harvest and extract, and we were harvesting and extracting many of the things from each of those pages back into the design system after creating them, like the vertical tabs component. Okay, the second nice thing about doing it this way is that generally roadmap sequencing is usually really subjective. Sometimes it's a powerful or a loud product manager that picks their pet projects or their favorite teams to get funding and priority, and that's the way that you do your pilots, and that's the way you march down your roadmap. Now, a scorecard like this turns all of that subjectivity into something much more objective that can be debated and discussed against agreed upon criteria. And so what I hope that you take away from this is that making a good roadmap should be like making good design system decisions, and vice versa. If you make good roadmap decisions, you should be making good design system decisions, and vice versa. As much as possible, make this a BOGO. You buy one, you get one free. You do the first pilot, you should get a lot of the second pilot for free. Now, the second piece of feedback that I get when looking at something like this, and it's often phrased as a criticism, is this. Really what you did was you took some cool looking things and you made them more boring. Yes, that's the point of design systems. In fact, my friend Josh Clark, who you'll hear from later today, he wrote a great article called "The Most Exciting Design Systems Are Boring." And there's so many great nuggets in this article. I want to quote the whole article. I won't do that. I'll just point out a few things from here. One of the things that Josh says is that design systems are containers for institutional knowledge. Identify the design problems teams confront over and over again. The more common the problem, the better. Design systems should prioritize the mundane. Josh isn't the only one who stumbled upon this idea. In his book, Do Scale, about scaling organizations, Les McKeown remarks, scalability is built on mastering the mundane. Design systems are an exercise in scaling design across an organization. So all of the thought in this book about scaling organizations applies very well to scaling design within an organization too. This is my friend Brian Powell. He is an incredible art director and designer. And if you follow him on Twitter, you'll know that he's occasionally known for riling up design Twitter. Here's an example of something a bit inflammatory that he shared a few months ago. He said, "Okay, I see now. Design systems are really just UI kits and libraries of icons. It's all making sense why designers are effing awful at design. They aren't designing. They are rearranging components someone else designed. Great job, scrapbookers." I mean, he's not wrong. Brian designs beautiful interfaces like this visually interesting composition for Chrome Industries, or this typography and grid-driven portfolio for Studio, or this rich microsite to drum up interest for an upcoming TV show that he designed a few years ago. And so how do you reconcile this kind of work and this kind of designer with the idea that design systems should prioritize the mundane? This doesn't look mundane. This looks amazing. Well, luckily, Josh Clark has an answer for us there too in his article. And it's not that we're removing invention altogether and just doing mundane things. We're just reallocating the invention. Josh says, when the design system is boring, it frees designers and developers to do the new stuff, to solve new problems. Invention happens in the products. So if you're a designer like Brian, who just wants to invent and create new interactions and paradigms, that's awesome. Work on the products themselves. And then it's somebody else's job to take what's initially a unique, hard-won, one-off solution that you've designed for a particular scenario and figure out how to systematize that for others to use. Now, this is not a new idea, right? Think about any site that you built a couple of years ago, right? You painstakingly wrote some custom CSS and JavaScript and HTML for that functionality, and it was a work of art. Today, there's probably a jQuery plugin for it, and it's one line to instantiate. I remember I made a short film in design school. It was 90 seconds long, and it took me 10 weeks to create and finish. And just yesterday, my 8-year-old daughter made a better film than that on iMovie on her hand-me-down iPhone 5S in about 30 minutes. Right? Systematizing and democratizing great design solutions is the stuff that ensures that designers always have to keep upping the ante to see what they could invent. Now, I imagine some of you are thinking, well, wouldn't all designers want to work on the invention stuff rather than the systematizing stuff? Wouldn't they want to be doing the invention work? That's the more interesting work, right? Not the systemization work. That seems like, well, if that's the boring and mundane stuff, then isn't that the boring and mundane stuff? Well, in order to answer that, let's talk about beavers. Beavers are fascinating, aren't they? They build dams, mostly for protection. And also, they do it to make sure that they have food when it gets colder. But even though it's not their intention, so many other species benefit from what they build. Woodpeckers occupy the trees that beavers excavate. Ducks and geese settle in their old lodges. Their wetlands become homes for herons, kingfishers, frogs, lizards, dragonflies, mussels, beetles, and many, many more species. Dr. Clive Jones at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies came up with a name for creatures like beavers who create habitats for others to live in and flourish. He calls them ecosystem engineers. Now, isn't that a great name for people who either intentionally or maybe unintentionally create the habitat for others to flourish? I know many a designer that would have and have traded invention for habitat building. Now, I interviewed at Facebook a number of years ago, and I remember asking a really talented designer there, what was so interesting to him about working at Facebook? I'm like, it doesn't seem like a UI design challenge. So what keeps a designer like you interested? And he said, having the ability to roll out a feature to 1 million or 10 million or 100 million users, that's like crack. Ecosystem engineers are interested in building platforms, right? Quite literally, a raised level surface on which people or things can stand. About 30 years ago, Sir Tim Berners-Lee used existing technologies of HTTP and then the newly transformed version of SGML, which turned out to be HTML, and he stacked them together and built a new platform on that called the World Wide Web. And then about 15 years ago, it took only 6 months for the founders of YouTube to build it because it stood on the platform of the web, and they added these new ingredients like Flash and JavaScript to build their own platform. And nowadays, people use that platform to build even more things like their own careers as YouTubers or video bloggers or things like that. If you're the kind of person that likes building platforms to help others succeed, then a design system team role might be a right role for you rather than an invention role on a product team. All right, over to the last pitfall here. For the last decade or so, the divide between designers and engineers has really been growing. And as much as I don't like that, I understand that. I get why that is. It's because each of those disciplines have their own set of tools, their own experiences, and honestly, their own culture, right? There's developer Twitter and designer Twitter and engineer Twitter and all that kind of stuff. I get why that is, right? And one of the reasons that I'm so excited about design systems is that it is an equally powerful tool and useful tool for both designers and engineers. Remember, Prometheus' gift of fire to humans changed the course of humanity forever because humans did things with it. They cooked food, they migrated. When you get a new powerful tool, you have to change something in your behavior in order to make the most of it. And the biggest pitfall that I see with design systems is that designers and engineers still try to work the way that they've been working without a design system, even though they may have one now. Right? For example, I'll regularly say to one of our clients, a designer and engineer pair, I'd like you to work together on the homepage. And this is what they do almost every time. They go, yeah, cool, we'll work together. And then the designer goes back to their desk to make a comp of the homepage. And then the engineer waits for the designer to make a comp of the homepage so that they can build the comp to the designer's side. And they truly believe that this is working together, right? This, you do half and then I'll do the other half. It is not. It is not working together. I want to show you 2 short videos that hopefully illuminate how different working together could be. Now for this one, it might be a little bit unclear what's happening, but see what you can understand from it. We'll run it twice. I'll show you once without a lot of context, and then we'll run it again after some context. And I know some of you may have seen this before. I'm going to run this video. Okay, so for those of you that couldn't tell what was happening here, this is an experiment that Airbnb ran a few years ago. And what they did was they put paper sketches with just marker drawings in front of a camera, and through machine learning, the artificial intelligence tied a sketch to a component in the design system and assembled a layout automatically from the components in the design system. So let's watch this one more time just with that context and see if you spot anything new here. Now that's pretty incredible, right? How fast that happened. You know, in a matter of seconds, there's a full interface built here. Oh, here's a similar experiment, and this one's by Jordan Singer, who's a designer in New York. Wow. Full interfaces built in a matter of seconds and minutes. Now, let's freeze frame here on just this one part of this video. I don't know the specific mechanics of how this actually works, but I assume it's similar to the last video in that this one probably uses some natural language processing to tie recognized words and phrases to components in a design system. Now, what is bananas about all of this is that as an industry, we are more willing and able to write a software program that uses natural language processing or machine learning to assemble an interface than we are to sit with a designer or an engineer and use these same exact words in our conversation. Both of these examples assume that there's already a system or at least a library in place, right? And this is how you use a design system when you have it. The designer and engineer should sit down together, and the designer can say to the engineer, hey, what if we made an app that has a navigation bar with a camera icon? The title would be photos and a message icon. Below it would be a feed of photos, with each photo having a user icon, a photo, a heart icon, and a chat bubble icon. If you have a design system and a competent enough developer or engineer, that should be enough to get an interface started in the same way that a robot could do, just like we saw in these videos. My friend and frequent collaborator, Brad Frost, and I, we coach teams both in public and private workshops about how to work together more effectively, especially when you either have a design system or you're intending to create one. And we teach a method called the hot potato process, where designer and developer work on the same product in as small of a chunk of time as possible and pass it back and forth as often as possible, like a game of hot potato. And so we released a video of this workflow if you're interested in seeing the details. It's about 2 hours long and it goes over a lot of nuances. But the big idea here is how quickly you can create something of high quality in a very short amount of time if you know how to collaborate well. And we help teams shorten the product sprint cycle from weeks to hours. We do this regularly with our clients, I kid you not, by eliminating a lot of the waste that comes from waterfall in general and also just not knowing how to do Agile well. Now, I just showed you 2 AI versions where the designer, quote unquote, tells the computer to make something. Now, what's even better about doing this with another person instead of an AI, and I would say maybe, and I wouldn't be able to replicate this, is that the other person could say, ooh, I have a different idea or a better idea. And that conversation, that is the start of where excellent work comes from, because everyone's invested in their idea and their ideas are represented early on. I recently discovered a really amazing store near my house. It's called Andy's Brick Shop, and it's a store full of Legos. I think it is a perfect analogy for what an ideal experience of interacting with a design system should look like. The first thing that you see when you walk in is a showcase of all of the coolest and most valuable things that people have made. So this photo, for example, it shows a Star Wars Y-Wing fully assembled and on sale for $360. It's like one of the first things that you see as you walk in. Close to it is an assembled $368 Star Wars Snowspeeder. Close to that are more Star Wars transport vehicles around the same kind of price range, around $140 or $200. Here's close by $100 Space Shuttle Orbiter. Here's an $80 assembled Millennium Falcon, right? You get the idea. They put all the great stuff up front to kind of show you, here are some things that you could make with all the stuff in this store. Then a little bit farther back, once you get past the kind of the higher end assembled pieces, you see some lower value assembled pieces like these. These are, $8, $10 storefronts and houses. Not as glamorous as the Star Wars stuff or nerdy as the Star Wars stuff, but definitely cool examples of what you could do with the pieces. Then as you get towards the middle of the store, lining the walls on each side are different lands, I guess I'll call them, that show assembled sets. So here's like Star Wars land that has all the Star Wars stuff. There's Middle Earth land from the Tolkien, Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings universe. There's DC and Marvel land, right? So you pass all of these kind of themed areas. Then further back in the store, once you get past that, you start to see collections that are organized by type rather than by theme. So here you see there's the collection of all the Batmans and all the Supermans and all the Chewbacca's and all the C-3POs, right? You get the idea there. Then one layer back from there, it gets even more granular the farther back you go. You can find a bin of just heads, lots of heads, lots and lots of heads, and lots of the other things too, right? Organized by type, spiderwebs, sprockets, connectors, flames, pots, wheels, all of them organized into their own categories. And then farther back, things that are not organized into categories. There's just a kind of a big hodgepodge of things. This is just a pile of all the uncategorized stuff. Some of it will be organized and categorized eventually, and some of it won't because it just doesn't have a natural home. Now there's even one more layer further back than this. This is the last one. Are you ready for it? At the very back of the store, there is a trash bin for fake Legos. Yes, they exist. They're out there. They come to this store frequently. Andy's Brick Shop is super duper smart by acknowledging it and making room for it while still letting you know that they're not part of the system. And here's the full view. This is the front of the storefront. You kind of see the different layers of the store as you walk back. You get to experience it in this way. And in the store, they even hold classes and meetups occasionally where enthusiasts can convene, they can learn from each other, and they can just generally play. What an amazing place. If we go back to Ala's definition of design systems, except for the digital product part, Andy's Brick Shop is a fitting model for how people should interact with a design system. Now, we do it backwards, don't we? Right? All of the popular reference sites out there lead with the itty bitty stuff, right? The principles, the components. It's all the stuff that the design system team works on. Now, that is important for sure. I'm definitely not knocking that, but it's kind of like starting at the back of the store, right? How do the product teams get represented and see themselves as part of the design system? The work that they're doing is nowhere to be found generally on sites like this. And so, of course, product teams are skeptical about using it because there's no signal in here that it's for them. Now, sure, a reference site is definitely a documentation site, but only partially. We can't forget that it's a marketing site too. It has to attract product teams to want to use it. So, for example, for material design, lead with Gmail and Maps and search as powerful examples of what you could do with material and put those right on the homepage of your reference site. Atlassian, show us Bitbucket and Trello and Jira and prove to us that you can do efficient, consistent design at scale. Right? Once we start putting the Millennium Falcon at the front of the store, I bet more people will walk in. It's really easy to get caught up in the technical bits of a design system. After all, there are a lot of them. But my friend Gina Ann, who's the creator of Clarity, which is the conference about design systems, she often comes back to the idea that design systems are for people. The biggest pitfalls for design systems are not taking all the people stuff into account. Not helping your VP of product hit their roadmap goals, not helping your product teams by systematizing their work for them, not having conversations and collaborating with one another. The more we strive to help the people that the design system is intended to serve, the more we will see all the design system pitfalls and know how to avoid them. Thank you all very much.
Great. We made it. We made it over here.
We did it.
It's always interesting to see what happens when we do that little dance between one stage and the other, but that's great. We made it. So hopefully some people will find their way over as well. There were a few questions in the various channels, Dan, and I've got a few of my own. If you're happy to chat for a little while. Okay, excellent. So the first one, this is really of interest to me since I have a bit of an agency background. So forgive me, maybe bringing some of my own, I don't know, baggage along the way. But I really like the way you talked about kind of shifting the way that you sell the concept to a client about doing a design system. In fact, you kind of just skirted around using the phrase at all. And I think that's wonderful advice, because I often feel like things like that, and it often feels things like, frankly, test-driven development and like writing tests or quote unquote accessibility often find themselves, as a line item on a project plan and with a budget attached to it. And I really like the way that you talk about making this, well, this is now part of the process rather than an artifact, but it still feels like there is an artifact that comes out of it, and it's a way that you show progress along the way. So I'm kind of curious whether, taking this route and not kind of selling, we're going to give you a design system, but rather a design system emerging through the process, does that change the way you report progress to your clients and the way that you show work happening along the way and evolving, or how do the artifacts kind of change along the way?
Admittedly, my role on projects tends to be listening to what the client is responsive to, right? So like an example is with my kids. I want my kids to eat their vegetables, but if I tried to explain to them the nutritious, the nutrition benefits to it, and they'll grow up big and strong, like they don't care. They just care if it tastes good. So I have to show them that it tastes good. in order for them to want to do it. I could explain until I'm blue in the face about all the nutritious benefits and how they'll be better humans as adults and, all of that stuff. They just won't care. And the same thing I think is true of clients is, you could explain to them how design systems make design teams better and more efficient and more consistent. And look, we'll reduce the amount of buttons, but that's all the stuff that we care about as practitioners. It's not the stuff that everyone cares about. And so I think for a lot of the teams, they're not tuned to what other people care about. And if they were more tuned toward that, I think they'd have more productive conversations. Is they're trying to convince people based on what they value as opposed to what that other person values. And if you can talk about what they value, I think you'll get better buy-in. So that's a hard-earned lesson. One of the ways that we learn that is that the sales process for a design system is very, very long. And it's long because it's usually number like 3 on the roadmap, and it never moves up higher than that. There's usually always one of those things that I mentioned right above it, and there always will be something right above it. Rebranding or replatforming, all of that stuff tends to come before a design system. Sometimes is a cost center. That's how leadership sees it. And so there's always going to be something better that, there's better investment if we do something else. And so you have to be speaking that language in order to get traction on it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice, I think. In terms of when you should start thinking about a design system, and as you say, it's it's there throughout the process and what have you. But how soon should that work begin on a project? I mean, is there a time which is too soon to start planning to implement a design system or working towards it, or is it like out of the gate you need to be thinking about this right away?
And I think there's a too late stage, and unfortunately the window in between them is so narrow. Right? It's tiny. I think too soon is, a design system is a tool for scale, right? It's a tool for scaling design. If you don't care about scale, you don't really need a design system. If you're not trying to scale anything, you don't really need a design system. The moment you start to be thinking about scale, usually it's too late, right? Because then you're already probably trying to scale. Not a lot of organizations are good at saying, in a year and a half from now, we're going to start our scaling process. It's usually more reactive than it is proactive. But if you can get ahead of the fact that we're about to scale something, whether we're going to scale our customer base or we're going to scale our offerings or whatever those are, that's usually the sweet spot. It's just that lots of organizations are less proactive about that. So it's definitely too soon if you're working on one-off things. If you have one website, cool. If you have an app, fine. You may not need a design system. As soon as you get into 2 or 3, I think that's the time where we should start to go, is it a good enough investment for us to kind of put some time into thinking about how this scales now? Even if you don't do anything about it now, starting to think about it and have those conversations, that's a good stage for it.
Right. And that probably addresses a question that Quinn asked in one of the channels. He was asking about the payoff investing in that effort in creating a design system for potentially smaller size projects or smaller size teams. And it sounds that there is definitely like a sweet spot for you can be in there too early and it can be too small. And I guess you kind of answered that about that. It's when you start to need to scale and you've got 2 or 3 projects that might benefit.
Different amounts of doing that too. So for example, you may not need to build a design system for your organization because your organization is not going to scale their digital projects. But for every designer and developer that I know has some form of boilerplate that they use, and that is a form of it's not quite a design system yet, but that's a form of leading to a design system where like you want some things to be reusable so you don't have to reinvent all the boring stuff that you have to reinvent every time. Like that's why we have our boilerplate GitHub one-click install this thing, or run this command and it sets up all my build tools. Like those are forms of scaling. Those are forms of reusability. And so your organization might not need something like that. But if you wanted to get started by going like, what, we just tend to use the same CSS reset, all the time. All right, putting that in a place that's more accessible, that can be the seed that you plant that eventually grows into a design system or doesn't, or just stays there if you needed to.
Yeah, I really liked the way you were talking about like avoiding a design system graveyard, which I think I might have heard Gina Ann once use that expression, and I was like, oh, that's gold, because I've definitely been there. I've definitely been there for any kind of documentation, really, any kind of artifact which sits next to the project. has this risk of becoming a graveyard. And I think you were describing like selecting components to extract and kind of just be very selective about what things you include in the system. But I'm kind of curious to understand how even then you can avoid something getting dusty and old and being part of the graveyard if it's not integrated or ingrained in the actual code that's getting generated. Are there ways to avoid that kind of dustiness that can happen if you're not careful?
And it's difficult, right? That's why they become dusty. So, one thing I'll mention as a foundation is that when you do this process of you build a product and then you extract the components, you already know that component will have at least one use, right? And that's a good thing, because where a lot of teams start is you can't even guarantee that stepper component you're building right now abstractly is going to get even one use, because you don't even have a product that will use that yet. So I think that, like, one of the things that I love to share with design system teams is you have to celebrate the small wins, and one use is a win. You don't have to have, oh, every team now is using this thing and it's in production and all. Like, one use of it is better than 0 uses of it, and 2 is better than 1, and 10 is better than 2. But like, that's still a celebratory moment. So that's kind of the foundation of it, is if you do it the other way, you can at least guarantee one use. And then the rest is evangelism, right? The rest is about campaigning. So the thing that I sort of mentioned this a little bit at the end, where the thing that I think a lot of teams forget about or don't know how to do, or some combination of those two things, is that a design system is a product, right? Lots of people who talk about design systems say that a design system is a product, and it has to be managed like a product. So if you think about all the SaaS products that you probably subscribe to, whether that's, Basecamp or Hey or, Intercom or Trello or, any of those things, they all have marketing campaigns. They all have drip campaigns, over email. They all have funnels. They all your design system needs that. It is a digital product. Run it like a digital product. So why don't people use your, country drop down that you made on that one project? Because they don't even know about it, and they don't know where to get it, even if they do. And it was just more convenient to go and grab Bootstraps than it was to go and grab yours. And so those are the kinds of things that lead to design systems getting dusty, is like, I don't know, I just didn't know where it was. It's more apathy that leads to it than it is an active rejection of the design system. It's like, well, I mean, I had the code from the old project that I just copied and pasted. Sometimes that's just more convenient than like, oh, I have to go and find the package and then import it into my build and then this and then that. Like, it just seems like more work. So the active work that a design systems team has to do is the campaigning work, the evangelism, the marketing, the campaign, like all of that stuff. That's what keeps the design system as an active product, right? We all have used products that like we just forget about because we're like, oh yeah, like I never got an email about it after that, or like I didn't follow them on Twitter. So you just forget about it, and a design system suffers from the same sins as all digital products do.
Yeah, I guess that kind of discoverability and the convenience, those play into it so much, don't they, as you're saying? And
absolutely.
I feel like, and again, maybe this is another example of agency background hangover. Feels like I need like a built-in like strapline caveat for some of this, so I do apologize. But the number of projects I've worked in the past where the project finishes on like the delivery day, and then you're done, and you're okay, shipped it, good luck everyone, and then you're on to the next thing. And I guess really when it comes to a design system, particularly for like SaaS projects, the things like your products, things that you're describing there, the work really ramps up after launch day, right? And as things evolve and develop. So I suppose I'm just kind of nodding along aggressively, really, that has to just continue, that kind of raising awareness of it has to keep going once you've launched.
That we share in our diagnostic. So in our diagnostic, we give recommendations, and we give a roadmap, right? That's the deliverable, is we share, okay, we looked into the hood, and then here are some of the things that we recommend you do. And there are generally 3 types that we share. One is, maybe I guess 2. One is like, okay, you need to do this thing. Like, so for example, one of the common recommendations is you got to create a signature component, in your design system, because otherwise, why shouldn't anybody else just go and grab Bootstrap or Material Design? Like, there should be something about your organization that is built into the signature component that like will make people reach for that. And that has a start and a finish. So it's like, you know, you could start it today and then work on that for 2 weeks, you know, or 2 months or whatever, and then you're done. So that's one style of recommendation. But a lot of the recommendations in our diagnostic kind of fall under the other style, which is start it today and never stop doing it. Right. Like, so there's a lot like that where, you know, work together, work more collaboratively is a thing that we go start today and never stop doing that. You know, create marketing campaigns around your design system. Start today, never stop. Right. Like, and that seems like obvious. It seems common sense when you talk about a SaaS product. So you got to think about your design system that way. Like if a SaaS product stopped marketing one day, well, of course they would get less people to use it and less people to sign up for it. Why is your design system any exception to that? So, you know, so a lot of our recommendations, you know, as you're saying, tend to be, all right, today's the day that you're going to start this, but you have to be committed to it in order for it to be sustainable. And that's a thing that, you know, that a lot of organizations can't commit to or won't commit to. And that is a strong realization about, like, if you're not ready to support this product, it will end up in the graveyard or the, you know, the closet of with all the skeletons in it.
Yeah. I guess you're instilling a mindset, aren't you? You're kind of trying to like get that ingrained in the culture that's there forever. Yeah, I love that kind of idea of, oh, we bought a design system. It's in this ring binder up on the shelf over here. Whenever you need it, off you go. I want to change tack a tiny bit, if I may. So this is something again that I hear quite a lot from friends of mine who are designers, you know, around the web, kind of voicing a bit of a frustration about design systems. And you absolutely you know, address this, but I want to touch on it again. You know, there's this idea of design systems are what's homogenizing web design across all of the products. And I you know, you refer to this really beautifully with the most exciting design systems are boring, and kind of referencing the way that Josh talks about it. But even under those circumstances where, well, if we do this right, it should mean that designers are liberated from some of this kind of work so they can be more inventive. Do you feel that tends to be what is happening, or do you think that we do sometimes kind of fall back to, well, we've designed these things now, and now we will just make things out of Lego, and there is a kind of a homogenization that's happening? How do you feel about that?
I cut these slides from the deck just because of time, but I think in a future version of this talk, I'll probably bring it back in because I think it's an important topic, which is that I think that a lot of design system teams, they don't know what coverage to expect from a design system, right? So they think like, you know, there's one school of thought that's like, oh, no, I'm not going to use a design system because that's going to take away all my creativity, right? Like if everything's out of the box, I'm not, you know, I don't want to be one of those homogeneous designers. I don't want to be any of that. And then on the other side, there's a school of thought that like, if we don't build everything with our design system 100%, then it's a failure. Right. And it's like neither of those things are accurate because they're so extreme. It's probably somewhere in the middle. So one of the things that we tend to recommend to a lot of our clients is shoot for the 80% mark. Like 80% is good. You know, there's a lot about tech that relates to the Pareto principle, you know, the 80-20 rule. And I think this is no exception, where like shoot for the 80% mark. If you're building a page, try to build 80% of that page with components from the design system. If you're building a website, try to build 80% of the website with components from the design system. And like that scales macro and micro. And what that does is it leaves room for designers to go, oh, I can explore here. It also leaves room for them to say like, oh, I don't have to do all of this, you know, as I was expecting to. And that's a nice, almost liberating moment for designers when they, and I say designers, but I mean designers and engineers, everyone who uses a design system. I think it's a liberating moment for them to go like, oh, we don't have to have full coverage on this. We're still going to do custom work. There's still room for us in here. The system's not going to replace us, because I think that, you know, another kind of misinterpretation of a design system is, oh, this is automation now, right? This is something that's going to take all of our jobs and the robots are going to take over. And all it's how does that stuff help us in the work that we do? You know, I'm a professional web designer and I have been for many years, but when my dad calls me to help him make a website for his church, I use Squarespace. You know, like I can create something from scratch, but Squarespace is great. And there's a bunch of stuff out of the box that I don't need to reinvent. Why not use that? It saves me weeks and weeks of time. I don't need to create a custom website for that. There's great church themes on WordPress or on Squarespace or Wix or, you know, so how do those tools for automation, how do those things help us to do our jobs better. You know, and I love the way that Josh puts it, which is why I cite that article so much, is like, just take away the boring stuff. You know, like all the stuff I don't want to do, let the system do that stuff. And then let me do the stuff that I'm interested in.
Yeah, because we're so often trying to design solutions to problems that have been, you know, solved so many times, right? The various UI conventions that, you know, it's kind of tempting to say, well, we'll differentiate by finding an amazing new way to put a pair of socks in a basket or to switch tabs. So, and this is how we'll differentiate. But really, there are so many tried and tested solutions. I guess, like, why reinvent?
So many designers spending time trying to make like a cool card pattern. And I was like, why? Why would you choose to spend your time on that? You know, it seems like, you know, it seems like your efforts and your brain is much better spent elsewhere. Like, play a video game, you know, like do something else than that. That shouldn't be the place where you spend your time. Now, you know, if you're a card aficionado and that's the thing that you do, okay, cool. But for most designers, that's probably not the place that you should be spending your time.
Yeah. Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I kind of wanted just to nod to Nico in the chat, who's been kind of talking about, you know, in his experience, kind of creating a set of components that can be also then customized a little bit and allow for some customization and reuse. So it's not like, here it is, and it looks like this no matter what. I guess allowing some kind of flexibility in the components can give them more longevity as well.
That's a great observation. I can't tell you a design system that we've made or worked on that doesn't have more than one or two that doesn't have more than one or two variations per component. Because, like, do you really think that you'll be able to come up with one card or one table that fits every use case you're going to put it through? Like, that's a tall order too, you know? So give yourself some, you know, a lot of whenever we have a header component, there's usually 4 or 5 different variations. Card component, like all of the stuff usually has a couple of variations, as well as ways to customize them so that you get that infinite level of variety. That's still, sorry, not infinite, a finite level of variety, you know, that still gives you a range of options to choose from.
Got you. Dan, thanks so much for spending the time. I know after doing a talk, then hanging out and then doing a load of questions and being grilled while you're sat at home takes a bit of energy. So thank you so much for that. Really enjoyed talking to you and really enjoyed listening to your talk as well. Just one big thanks from us, really.
Everyone.